On June 12th, in the afternoon, like a couple of days ago, a loud blast was heard by a couple of people. Like it was so loud for people to ignore. Some people were seen running from the blast. Others were seen rushing towards the blast. Everyone was confused. Nobody knew what was really going on. Some people pulled their phones out, hoping to capture the chaos. People were screaming and yelling, saying, "Somebody call the ambulance. What is going on? How did this even happen? Maybe we can still do something about this." But it was too late. But why were they panicking? And why were they yelling? Well, they were yelling because the Boeing 787 was burning the remains of those who perished in the crash. The plane was supposed to go to London, but unfortunately, it never made it. I'm VALF, a video editor and a voice actor. Welcome to today's episode. Now, I did a thorough research, making sure all the facts I deliver are accurate. But new reports are coming in every single day, so feel free to correct me in the comments if I do end up making a mistake. You see, after the crash, the list of casualties was really high, and it was devastating. Young, old, they all perished. Matter of fact, 242 passengers and over 38 civilians died. The list of passengers that died includes a couple in their late 20s. They were expecting a baby, and the wife was heavily pregnant. Also, two brothers, they were in their early 20s. They also perished. The list goes on. And it's really painful to hear. And of course, we can't forget about the people who weren't on board, the people on the ground. Like these couples in their 40s, they were headed to a government facility to update their IDs. But this tragedy took their lives. Now, plane crashes are horrible. So a lot of the bodies that were recovered were unrecognizable. They were badly charred, making it impossible for the authorities to examine or even ID them to determine who is who. The plane also struck a building, killing medical students, doctors, and just people who didn't know that something like this could happen while they're on the ground. A lot of these people, they were just having lunch. It was a real tragedy, and it just goes to show just how fragile humans really are. Obviously, since the blast was super huge and there were a lot of people reporting this stuff, healthcare officials and rescue team were deployed and they were able to get to the injured people on time, reducing the number of casualties. Although it's sad, they weren't expecting anyone to survive because the blast was super deadly. But something strange happened. A man was spotted and he was a passenger on that plane. So when the incident occurred, he was able to jump out of that plane using the emergency exit. His name is Ramesh, a 40-year-old British Indian, seated in 11A, which was next to the emergency gate. Of course, he was taken to a hospital and he sustained multiple injuries. They were pretty bad, like injuries in his chest, eyes, and feet. But he survived. But his brother wasn't so lucky. Ramesh and his brother Ajay came to visit their family members back home, but on their return flight, he lost his brother. Honestly, nothing could have prepared anyone to deal with the tragedy like this. I imagine Ramesh woke up that day thinking it was going to be an ordinary day. So he had breakfast, everything was normal, he said goodbye to his family, and with his brother, he headed to the airport. He checked in and boarded the plane. For a moment, everything seemed okay. But after the takeoff, not only Ramesh, but everyone else on board started noticing something weird. They all realized that the plane is not going up. For some reason, it seems like the plane is struggling to generate lift. So panic sets in and a lot of people start crying, trying to prepare themselves for what is to come. All of them must have felt the plane going down, and then a loud bang and everything went black, leaving one survivor, Ramesh. He was fortunate enough to use the emergency exit, which was torn apart, by the way. Luckily, he was able to crawl out of there, even though he was severely injured. He mentioned that there were other survivors too, but since they were too injured, they were not able to move, and the fire killed a lot of them that were still conscious. Ramesh said, and I summarize, "I don't remember the impact, but when I came to, I stumbled out of my seat, blood in my mouth. The entire plane was unrecognizable, smoke everywhere, people moaning, and then silence. I crawled towards the light and I jumped, and that jump is what saved my life. I still don't know how I survived." So people were rightfully extremely mad. They were like, how did something like this happen? There needs to be an investigation, and there was an investigation, but it didn't give a definitive answer. Most of the evidence hints towards engine failure. According to the reports, it is said that both engines failed, making it impossible for the plane to generate thrust. Generally, all pilots are trained to deal with one engine failure, but two? That's very rare. A video taken by a teenager clearly shows that the plane was struggling to generate any kind of lift. Now, there were other claims too. Some people suggested that it was a human error, or the pilot had something to do with it. But the pilot is well seasoned, has years and years of experience, and he had a very appealing track record. It's not like he was untrained, or it's not like he was a new pilot. He'd been flying for years. So that could only mean that whatever happened was something that couldn't be fixed by pilots. Also, side note, there were a lot of blame game too. There were claims that foreign nations, during maintenance, ended up sabotaging the plane in some way. Or there was some form of cyber attack. It was a mechanical or system failure, not foreign interference. So far the allegations were baseless, based on evidence. Boeing, the company responsible for making these planes, they were accused of doing manufacturing shortcuts. A lot of the times, we don't really pay attention to the victims. We treat them like they're a piece of news and discard them as soon as we are bombarded with other information. We have to acknowledge that what we saw was a tragedy, and we need to make sure that there are consequences that prevents it from ever happening again in the future. Many lives were lost that day, and it's nothing but a tragedy that we have to remember to make sure that the future we build is protected, or at least a little bit safer. Remember that one survivor? Yeah, he went back to the crash site, and he broke down. He was very emotional, and he just couldn't contain his emotions. He started crying, and it all just makes this whole tragedy a lot more personalized, I think, if we really put ourselves in their shoes and see things the way they see things. I think we would be a lot more careful with our words. Bollywood actors, corporations, and people around the world shared messages of sorrow and support, which I think is essential when it comes to situations like this. Tata, which is a corporation in India, had to compensate the victim's family. But let's face it, no amount of money could ever bring back who have died. The survivor Ramesh from seat 11A became kind of like an icon or a media symbol. And people, whenever they're booking flights, are looking for seat 11A, which is an interesting development, I must say. Due to this tragedy, a lot of the complaints that people had are now being amplified and respected in a sense, because they didn't used to do that. So now they're taking complaints a lot more seriously, which is better than it was. Like this video of a woman on board complaining about not having access to AC, and no matter how much they call the flight attendants, they just won't answer. Because, well, it's not my problem, right? Anyways, due to that tragedy, a lot of flights were canceled, and travelers are a lot more hesitant than before. People are afraid to travel, and that fear is growing. Also, Boeing stock took a massive hit after the crash, which I guess is unsurprising. The biggest issue the netizens are talking about now has to do with the trust, Trust is very hard to maintain once broken. People love to travel, they want to travel, but they want to do so knowing that they'll be safe. So we just want answers. Like, there has to be a transparent investigation that tells us what went wrong and what is being done to prevent this from ever happening in the future. And until that happens, everyone is going to feel restless. Now, I want to hear from you. How do you feel? Do you feel scared? Do you feel like you can't trust the system anymore? Do you feel heartbroken for the victims? Or do you just feel exhausted because you're just tired? Let me know. Be safe out there. Tell your loved ones that you love them. And I'll see you in the next episode.